Good morning. Thanks for being here. Good to see all your faces today. We appreciate your participation. We love to put these things on. We do about 6 a year, and this is the first of the season. So we'll probably try to get 5 more in before it gets really busy next spring. I know most everybody, but I'm Bob Houston, the manager for First American Title, and Debbie Carr's with me today, as well as Rhonda Bentley in the back. So thanks for helping put this on. You guys do a great job. Let's see. Want to make sure everybody's signed up on the sign-up sheet as you came in. That's what we generated our credit hours from, and also put a card in the basket, and that's for the door prize. So if you haven't, sometime during the morning, get that done and make sure you're in the game to win something. So you can put it in. Maybe if you can sneak past Debbie. If you would, mute your cell phone or turn them off for the program so we can get through it. We're filming today as we always do, and we'll be editing this down into a DVD that will loan back out. You guys probably won't be interested in this one, but we've got about 15 in the library now and growing. So it's a great way to get some credit hours if you're getting short. And so you can talk to Debbie or anybody in the Thomas office about borrowing those. Today we've got a program on short sales and other topics related to real estate, but it's a timely class because I think we're just at the front end of the ramp up of seeing short sales being an important part of the market. I had the opportunity to listen to our speaker, Jim Reinhart, talk yesterday, and it was great, so I'm sure you'll enjoy it today. Short sales sound like a bit more work, but in some markets now, they're the predominance of what there is to sell. So it's a nice tool to put in your toolbox. So I think we'll work about halfway through the 3-hour block and take a break and then finish it out. So Jim is a First American employee, an attorney, and works in our 3-person legal team in Portland with Alan Brickley and Jay Dobson. I think you guys have probably seen speak before. Jim's a real estate specialist and was in private practice for 15 years and worked for several of the large firms in Portland, Schwab Williams and Miller Nash, and also worked in London for a year for a real estate related firm there. And so he's got great experience and great background, and I'm sure you'll find his knowledge to be helpful. So with that, I'll give you the speaker, Jim Reinhart.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming. So I'm Jim Reinhart. I'm underwriting counsel at First American Title. And I basically describe that as yeah, you can't hear me.
Did you mute it?
No. It's on. So you can't hear me? Apparently we have some technical difficulties.
Sorry about it now.
Gotcha, okay. So basically what I do is I answer the phone all day. That's probably the best way to describe my job. I've handed out a couple of pieces of paper that have a very bad photograph, a couple of outlines. I used to represent the timber industry, so the more pages I print off, I feel like I'm doing my clients some good. But what's on there, oh, and my business card's there. I would toss everything when you're all done, but keep the business card, because it's got my phone number on it. You are more than welcome to call me. I'd say about half of the calls I get throughout the day are from brokers and attorneys calling with questions. They've got a closing and there's some issue in the title report that they have never seen, or they don't know what it is, or they need to just find out if they even care about it or not. Or they'll call and say, you know, a broker will call and say, my client's being asked to sign an SNDA and I don't even know what that is, which is a subordination, non-disturbance, and attornment agreement, and it's a fairly common document in commercial transactions, but You don't see them a lot in most transactions. And so I just help out with whatever I can. My job is essentially to close transactions. That's it. That's the nature of a real estate lawyer. Lots of other lawyers kill deals, especially litigators. Real estate lawyers only keep their jobs if they find ways to close transactions. So call me if I can help you close a transaction. I represent First American Title, so I can't represent you or your customers, but I'll do what I can to help get the deal closed. I get calls from people who are closing at other companies saying, I don't even know what to do about this, and they don't have anybody there who can help. And so keep the business card, toss the rest of the papers. But you're welcome to call. As we chat, please interrupt with questions. I'm going to stand up here for 3 bloody hours. So, I'll get bored if you don't ask me things. I already know about short sales, so listening to me talk about it is no fun for me. So please, whenever you have a question, just pipe up, and I'll happily try to answer. And I also apologize, I drink a ton of water. I'm training for a marathon in October, the Marine Corps Marathon, and so it just requires me to consume water all the time. And I may even sit down at some point, because while I can run 26 miles, I have trouble standing up, it seems. So a little bit of background. As Bob mentioned, I spent my first 15 years working for a couple of the big firms in Portland doing nothing but commercial real estate transactions. Before that, I worked for a law firm in London, which was an amazing opportunity. Because all of our law, real estate law anyway, came from English law. And so it gave a good background to be able to understand why we do some of the things that we do. When you go to law school, you can do anything in undergrad that you want. It doesn't make any difference at all. You can be a chemistry major and go to law school. And I happen to have a family history of my father, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather all had masters in history. So it seemed like a natural thing for me to do. Also, I chose it because it's far and away the easiest major in college, because everything has already happened. I mean, it's just not that hard. So every class I teach, I start with the history of the day. It almost never has anything to do with the subject. And the small little game that I'll play as I teach a class that I've taught before is to figure out a way to take the history of today and tie it into our class. So you have to see if we can do that. So I'll take a minute to talk about the history of the day, which honestly has nothing to do with the topic. Today in 1580, Sir Francis Drake finished circumnavigating the globe. He left from Plymouth, England, and he returned back to Plymouth, England today in 1580. The Queen was particularly happy that he showed up because he brought back so much pillaged Spanish gold that it was her share, which was half, was more than she made that entire year off of all the peasants in England producing things for her. So that was a big day in history to have somebody actually go all the way around. As you might have heard the debate tonight, and I'm happy to, if you ask questions about politics or the mortgage fiasco or whatever you want, I'm happy to answer those too. I don't actually know anything more than anyone else, but I've got plenty of opinions. I was looking forward to tonight's presidential debate because, as a history major, the biggest debate in presidential history, in my opinion, was today in 1960. When Richard Nixon and John Kennedy debated for the first time on television. And there are many people who suggest that the primary reason Nixon lost to Kennedy was he just looked god-awful on that debate. Anybody watch it? Okay. Do you remember? I mean, sweaty, pasty, looked like he was going to look terrible. And people think that that's possibly why he lost that election. Changed world history to some extent. So it's kind of too bad we don't have tonight's debate. I wonder when they scheduled it if they had any idea that there was a connection. Yeah?
I heard just about a half hour ago on CNN that it is on.
Really?
That McCain is headed to his Virginia headquarters and they expect him to be there.
Oh, fabulous.
That was a half hour ago as of CNN. So.
Well, that's great. The only news I've heard since I've been at the coast was BBC News, which is my favorite news anyway, but they don't honestly tell you that much about what's going on here. Apologies, I took off my watch as well. Lawyers, having been in private practice for so long, we bill in 6-minute increments. Okay, so my entire life has been done in 6-minute increments. So I can talk forever and ever and ever, so I'll try to keep track of the time and not keep you too long. Just don't let me leave without my watch. So a couple other things in history. Anybody here a Nolan Ryan fan? Today he set a major league record by throwing his 5th no-hitter today in '81. To go back a couple of years, today in 1973, the Concorde made its first nonstop flight across the Atlantic. And followed the Concorde a bit because it was such a fascinating airplane. It actually was first flown in '69, but it didn't do a transcontinental flight until '73. So basically flew from '69 until 2003, which was really a long time. And if you've ever seen one, they still look like it's a brand new modern plane. You wouldn't think it was first put into production clear back then. Its average speed was Mach 2.02, which is over 2,100 miles an hour. It cruised at 60,000 feet. And at 60,000 feet, you get twice as much solar radiation than you do when you fly at the normal 30,000 feet. And so that was a concern. They actually had detectors to see if there was a solar flare and it might cause too much radiation, they'd immediately dive down. But they determined it was safe because the flight was so much shorter that you actually got less radiation flying the Concorde at twice as much radiation because of the shorter amount of time. So I thought that was kind of...
Didn't they close that fleet in 2000?
They actually didn't close it until '03. 2000 was when they had the crash, but they brought it back again for a little while, and then they determined it wasn't safe enough. So they brought it back after the crash. To get to radiation, and I have no idea how we're going to tie this one into the topic today, but what the heck. 1983, we almost all died. There was a Soviet military officer named Stanislav Petrov who was assigned to a bunker where they were using satellites to detect ICBMs launched from America to the Soviet Union. And his detector went off. And the idea of mutually assured destruction said, when you get a warning, you launch. Okay? You don't wait until you get hit. The moment you see the launch, then you launch as well. And he saw that, and he determined unilaterally that it was a false alarm. His standing orders were, when this happens, we launch. And he said, no, I'm not going to. I think it's a false alarm. And then a little bit later, he got 4 more hits of ICBMs flying over. And he again said, I'm not going to do it. We don't actually know if he just didn't want to blow up the world, even though maybe his country was going to be blown up, or whether he really believed it was a false alarm. But we came that close in 1983 to being gone. So, see if we can tie that into short sales. Not really sure how, but we'll give it a try. How many people here have done a short sale? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a half dozen hands or so. If I come back next year, most of you are going to raise your hands. A short sale, for those who haven't done them and don't know what they are, is when an owner of property has to sell their property or otherwise decides to sell their property, and they owe more on it than the sale price is going to be. And owing more isn't just their first loan and their second loan, but it might include judgments that they have against them or any other liens that have been put against the property. So basically, it's when it's worth less than is owed on it somehow. If you go to southern or eastern Oregon right now, go to Cave Falls or go to Medford or go to Ontario, half of all transactions are short sales. Half. When I started teaching, this class kind of the topic became, short sales have always been around to some extent, but the topic became of interest to folks in January, I'd say, because it started becoming more common. It was harder for people to refinance, so when they needed to sell, they couldn't just pull some equity out to keep their loan going or whatever. So it became a little more of an issue then, and I would go into, I teach mostly in Portland because that's where I live, and I'd ask the same question, how many people, and I'd get about as many hands as I saw today. And now most of the room would be raising their hands. It started out, at least as I saw it in Portland, with brokers being involved by saying, I'm a short sale expert. Okay, they're a specialist. And they'd advertise themselves that way. And they got transactions because they advertised themselves that way. Whether any of you ever decide to do that or not, we'll see. But for those that give it a try, you'll be interested to watch how many more transactions you get as short sales become more common. Most of the time, people became experts because they were representing a buyer, and the seller's broker didn't know anything about it and wasn't helping, and it needed to get done. And so the buyer's broker wound up dealing with most of it, and by the time they got done with one, they were an expert because there just weren't that many people doing them. And as they would tell people about them, they'd get more and more listings. So I hope that it won't be the case, but I honestly expect that it will be the case that before long you will all, or many of you, will be short sale experts, having done a few transactions. Oh, and if anybody has any questions about the mortgage meltdown as they're describing it, happily ask questions about that, because it's been really fun to watch for me. It's very much part of what I do. There are many folks who know a lot more than I do, but and everybody's just speculating. Yeah.
So whose fault is it?
Whose fault is it? I guess it's just the way I was raised. In my opinion, it's the fault. Okay, there's a whole bunch of people to blame, I suppose. There's a Japanese saying that says, "Fix the problem, not the blame." So I'd rather us fix the problem. But if you're going to blame people, I start out by blaming the people who actually took out the loans. And I don't, some people, they were, there's somebody in California who just got nailed because they pulled out $47 million in loans on houses by getting 100% financing on all these multi-million-dollar houses that they were making about $80,000 a year. Okay, it just doesn't work. So I start with those folks because they should take personal responsibility for being stupid and taking out loans that they couldn't repay. There's obviously some blame to be put on some mortgage brokers who were writing loans that they knew people couldn't pay. And I say some because I don't think they're entirely to blame at all. And then you've got the industry that was making so much money off of these loans that they were encouraged. I mean, look at the underwriting standards that changed. I mean, that's, none of these loans could have been made but for a dramatic shift in the underwriting standards. So, can you blame them? I mean, there are a bunch of companies who made billions and billions of dollars because they loosened up their underwriting. And they're losing some money now, but it'll be curious to see at the end of all this, if you take the 10-year period, did they actually lose money or not? I mean, that'll be a big interest to me. When you look at most of what we have is a perception. I'm not suggesting which candidate I like, but you remember when McCain said something about the fundamentals of the economy are strong. He's not wrong. They're really bad for some people. It's always bad for some people. It's just really apparent right now because it's hitting so many people as homeowners and they're worried about their homes. But I don't doubt that the fundamentals are still there. What we're seeing, though, is a change in the way people are doing accounting. I suppose if you want to pick someone to blame all the accountants because of how we change the way we keep track of dollars. So we had these loans. We've always had good loans that, A loans or AAA loans that you can hold at a certain value. And my old firm used to represent people who bought the bad loans. Okay, that was there are a certain percentage of people who are more likely to go into foreclosure than others, and so those loans aren't worth as much. And we used to represent a group of people who bought those loans, and they paid a value for them knowing the percentage that was likely to go into foreclosure. Okay, it's a reduced value. As property values went, and you all already know this, but it kind of helps to have the background. As the property values went up, people tended to refinance. The job market was fabulous, so people tended to have jobs, so they were able to pay their loans, and they were able to, as equity went up, refinance the loans before they got themselves into any sort of trouble. And so these loans that would otherwise have gone into foreclosure maybe over a 10-year period were being refinanced in 2 years. So they weren't going into foreclosure. So even though they had a lower rating, their value wound up being exactly the same as an A loan. So they put them on their books. You want to show that you're a big company. You need to show that you've got a great deal of assets. You show this asset at $200 million, even though a few years ago you probably would have ranked it at $150 million. But because it's getting refinanced all the time, there's no defaults, it's worth $2 million, so you show it at $2 million. And so then you look like you're a bigger company, so your share price goes up, more people are going to be interested in your company. The CEOs make a lot more money, the shareholders are making more money as they sell. Everybody's happy, it's working out great. And then suddenly when people can't refinance, then maybe they're not worth as much as they were. We don't actually know. Most of the markdowns people took are speculative markdowns, okay? So they had $200 million on their books, and now they're like, well, gosh, maybe these aren't worth as much. We're going to write them down to $150 million. So they say they just lost $50 million, okay? That's what they're showing. We just lost $50 million this year. They haven't actually lost anything yet, okay? It's all on paper, all right? But it looks really bad. Now, when I first saw that happening, I thought, these CEOs are so smart, because 2 years from now, when it turns out most of those loans weren't bad, they're going to show them back on their books at $200 million, and they're going to say, hey, I made you $50 million. They're going to look great in a couple of years. We don't know how many of them are going to go bad. Most loans are still fine. I mean, if you go to Nevada, okay, it's not very good. Jacksonville, Florida, I've never been there. I hope to never go. 1 in 10 loans are in foreclosure. All right? Yeah, Fresno. I mean, you go to a bunch of different places. I mean, I think Las Vegas is just, well, who would have built there in the first place? But it's unbelievable. But, you know, most of the loans here are fine. You know, when you hear that, you know, the number of mortgages in foreclosure have doubled, okay? Look at the percentage of mortgages in foreclosure. It's this many, all right? So they doubled to that many. See the difference? That many to that many. We'll have to see how far it goes. Yeah?
Could you comment on Washington Mutual and what happened last night?
Well, what happened last night I know very little about because the only news I had was BBC News, and they honestly didn't care about Washington Mutual. What I do know about Washington Mutual has to do with about a week ago or so when it was announced that they were officially on the blocks to be sold. And they were always up for sale in a sense, except as you may recall about 5 months ago, they were in big trouble and somebody dumped $7 billion into them. And it was partially a loan, partially a purchase. Certainly a bunch of shares were secured against it. And part of that transaction was, it was an investment by the company who dumped in the billions of dollars. And Washington Mutual couldn't just pay them back. Okay? There was essentially a prepayment penalty of over $1 billion. And so that prevented anyone from buying Washington Mutual up until about a week ago, when that company realized that their $7 billion was at stake if Washington Mutual went bankrupt. And so they waived those penalties. And that's suddenly how they were even available to be purchased in the first place. I'm not surprised. I guessed last week when that happened, I guessed that if they weren't sold by today, that they were going to file bankruptcy today. And so, look, sure enough.
Well, it was kind of confusing because on the news that I heard this morning, the government bought them out and then sold them to J.P. Morgan Chase. Now, how could they do that?
It certainly could be true. I would think it more likely that they loaned them the money to buy it. That's more likely to be the case. As we're watching this $700 billion bailout proposal, which, you know, at this point I don't actually think will happen as the original proposal, which was buy all the mortgages. Okay, and it's not a bad solution. Buy all the mortgages, take them off of the books of all these lenders. This actually will tie into short sales, believe it or not. Take them off of the books of these lenders. The bad thing about videotaping this is we're all going to find out how wrong I was. Take them off the books so that they don't show these losses, so that they don't have to keep writing them down as they discover that there's more percentage of foreclosures. That would help their share prices go up, but more importantly, from the government's perspective, it would give these folks a whole bunch of cash to go back out and loan into our economy, because that's how we keep things going. We are such a credit-oriented economy. It'd be nicer if we were a savings-oriented economy, but we're just not. So it would help a great deal to get that money back in. I don't think it's going to happen that way, and as you've all heard, Congress says it's not going to happen that way. It's still just the president and a few select folks who are saying this is the way we want to do it. There's a couple other options besides just buying all the mortgages, which when I first heard that, there were a number of real estate lawyers in Portland. We all got together and said, okay, how do we cherry pick the good ones? Because you know most of these loans are going to be fine, okay, most of them. So we need to go out and buy as many of these loans that we think are going to survive as we possibly can, and you'll make a bloody fortune. Somebody's going to make a lot of money. I actually think that if the government buys them all, they're going to make a lot of money.
Aren't they actually going to make a market of them, so there's a place where they can be bought and sold, so they have a bid price, so that those loans can go back on, that are held, can actually have a price and be against their...
So the question is, aren't those actually all going to be sold by the government? And first of all, that proposal I still think is actually going to wind up being dead in the water, so I don't know that it'll happen. But yes, the proposal was that they're going to hold them and then they're going to sell them. When they sell them was completely up. How they're even going to sell them, how they're going to value them was completely up in the air. I mean, my favorite proposal for selling them was so that they couldn't be cherry-picked, is they were going to say everybody whose last name starts with an A, those are for sale today. Tomorrow we're going to sell the B's, the C's, and just do them in lots, and people are just going to have to buy them as they were without any... Yeah. So it's a little unclear. I would actually like to see them go out and and I'm not the only one who suggested this by any means, I would prefer to see the government go out and actually loan money like they did with Chrysler many, many years ago. Loan them money, have them pledge their shares as security for the loan, and just give them the operating capital to be able to work and let this mortgage issue or question work itself out through the system to see how many actually go bad, rather than try to pick a price now to buy them at and then try to pick a price a little later to sell them at without us still even knowing where they're going to go.
Well, there were comments yesterday, they don't even know the value of it.
That's right.
It's impossible to establish a price.
Well, it's not impossible in the sense that they'll pick one, but there's not a great deal of data because it's speculation as to how many of them will actually wind up in foreclosure. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. You know, a year ago, we were like, okay, we all knew things were bad a year ago. I mean, nobody's kidding themselves, but we thought, you know, be fine 9 months from now. You know, it's a little blip, all right? So a few months later going, we're like, okay, well, we're still getting worse. So maybe we're going to say it's a year from now. Nobody knows, but the people who are economists who are following this, who know so much more about this than I do, have been wrong every month, okay? Every month it gets, you know, when it's going to get better, it gets a little further along. We're not as bad as some places, but it still isn't good. I don't know how many, can you look around the room? Was this room fuller a year ago? Okay, was it fuller 2 years ago than it is now? We have, I mean, the number of brokers renewing their licenses is dropping dramatically in Oregon, and it's going to keep doing it. I know somebody who's new who just started, and I'm like, well, I guess it's actually a good time to start because you're used to not making any money. All right, so that brings us to short sales. Short sales are harder to do than a normal sale. Okay? It's a lot because it's more work and it takes more time and it's less likely to happen. So why would anybody do them? I mean, honestly, you're going to spend, you know, 8-10 times as much time working on a short sale transaction than you would a normal sale, and it's less likely to occur. So, and the folks who were doing them, it's because they weren't doing anything else. I'd rather close 3 short sales than no regular sales. So that's kind of what's happening with them. When you have a short sale, as I mentioned before, it's because the property has to sell for less money than is owed on it. Usually a first mortgage, often a second mortgage, sometimes a couple of judgments or a construction lien or something like that. And they're usually in default already. Unfortunately, most sellers, when they get in default,
So what happens to the balance? Does then the seller still owe money on the loan once it's all done?
We'll talk about that. The standard lawyer answer to all questions, by the way, is it depends. Okay? And that very much applies. It depends. And we'll talk about that as we go a little further. And I would normally, there's an outline out there that I am so not going to follow, and the more questions you ask me, the further I'll get from following it, and I'd like to get further away from it. But that one actually requires me to talk about a little bit more before I can explain how what they're going to get out of exactly. What the heck, we'll talk about it now. So if you have a loan for, let's just use round numbers, you have a $200,000 loan, okay? And they're going to do a short sale, which means they're going to take less than what's owed on it, all right? And how much less depends. The average cost to a lender right now to foreclose on a piece of property, which means a period of months where they're not getting paid on the loan because it's in default, the cost of paying attorneys, is very worthwhile, to do the foreclosure. The time they hold the property while it's for sale, which is probably rather short because you're going to be helping them sell it very quickly, and the commission they have to pay you, the cost of selling the property, average right now, $60,000. Okay? So if a lender has a $200,000 loan and a seller says, I need to do a short sale, I don't have enough money in this property to even pay you back, it behooves the lender to take $140,000 right now on average. Okay? Just take the $60,000 hit right now rather than spend the next year taking that $60,000 hit. Get it off their books, get their money, and move on. And that's a big hit. I mean, $60,000 is the average. There are many times that it's more. So what happens to the seller with all of this? Well, a couple of things. Sometimes, and occasionally, and I'll mention a little bit later, sometimes the lender agrees to the short sale, releases the property, but doesn't release the debt. Okay? This is rare, but it does happen. I've seen it happen, and it's very painful for the borrower. When they have a $200,000 loan, the lender takes 180 to release the property, and then a week after closing, the lender calls the seller and says, we'd like our other $20,000 now, okay? Because what happens in a loan, you have a promissory note and you have a trust deed. Those are the two operative. Now granted, there's actually a pile of documents this thick at a closing, but the two operative documents are a promissory note and a trust deed. The promissory note talks about the debt obligation. You know, you owe $200,000, you're going to pay this percent of interest on it, it's going to accrue, this is your monthly payment, here's the maturity, talks about all that. Has an attorney's fees provision in it, because that's always important. And then you've got a trust deed. The trust deed is what secures that promissory note against the piece of property that says if you stop paying on the note, then I'm going to foreclose on this trust deed. Okay, they're two very separate documents. They do totally separate things. When the lender in a short sale releases the property so that it can be sold, okay, they're releasing the trust deed, right? Still a promissory note out there. So if you don't release the promissory note as well, cancel it, call it paid, call it satisfied, whatever you choose to call it, then that debt is still there. And they'll call the next day and say, we'd like the rest of our money. And it's going to be owed because that was still the personal obligation of the party. Most of the time, though, lenders are asked to release the property and release the note. Big difference. So as you are representing, and we'll talk about how you'll be representing them as we go along when we somehow get back to the outline. It's kind of like tying in the history of the day. You will be asking them to release the property, which is release the trust deed, and cancel the note. And if that happens, then as far as the lender goes, there's no more obligation to the lender. If you don't cancel the note, then there's still that obligation. They're still going to try to collect it. And, you know, those are going to last for years. So it isn't like, you know, it stops that next day. If they don't, even if they don't try to collect it, there's what's called relief of a debt. Okay? If you have a $200,000 loan and they take $180,000, you've been relieved of $20,000 in debt. Make sense? Relief of indebtedness is a taxable event. The IRS says it's the same as if you received $20,000 in income and then paid back the loan with that. All right? That's the way they look at it. It's obviously a fiction, but nevertheless, that's the way it is. So you're relieved of debt, and that's taxable. They're going to tax you as if you made that money. So somebody who had a $200,000 loan and sells it, and they only have to pay $180,000 to their bank, would otherwise then be taxed on that $20,000. The government saw this as a real problem. First of all, it's really hard to collect from these folks, right? They're broke. So, you know, why even have it on the books? It's hard to collect from them, and it was really interfering with people getting back on their feet, which is what we really want to happen to people. So last year in November, they passed something called the Mortgage Forgiveness Debt Relief Act of 2007. And basically it said that if you're relieved of debt on your primary residence, then it's not going to be a taxable event. And so all these people doing short sales weren't then getting hit by the IRS after closing. There are some limitations to it. It only applies to your primary residence. So if you're out there flipping properties, or you've got investment properties, or you've got a vacation home, and I've seen all these things happen in short sales, when they're relieved of that debt, they're still going to get nailed by the IRS. And that lien is going to stay around for it's going to follow that debtor around for a long time. So that is going to be taxable. The Mortgage Forgiveness Relief Act stays in effect through January 1st of 2010. Obviously, at some point, the government was speculating that things ought to be fixed by then. We'll see. I certainly would like that to be the case. The other limitation is you can only be relieved of up to $2 million of debt while it's still not taxable. I was trying to figure out who's getting relieved of $2 million. I mean, that suggests you had like a $40 million loan, right? And you're relieved of $2 million. I mean, anyway. So that's kind of the financial impact to the seller. There can be quite a bit. Either the lender could still be going after them for the balance of the debt, or the IRS could be going after them. And to the extent that there are judgments against property, because that's often the case, or there's construction liens against the property that are being released, those oftentimes The judgment just releases that property but doesn't satisfy the judgment. And so those judgments are still going to be around to go after the seller. Now, personally, I'm okay with that because these were obligations of the parties. You know, they ought to be paying them. It's too easy for people to be not accountable. There's my pulpit for the day. Well, there might be a couple more times. All right, so you as a broker have a short sale. Your customer comes to you and says, I need you to sell my house. You're the best one in town. I trust you. You're my friend, whatever it is that they decided to come to you for. And you're going to sell it, and it's a short sale. First thing you're going to do is you're going to call the loss mitigation department of the bank. You're going to get a preliminary title report that shows all the obligations, so you're going to know who they are. You're going to know who the first lender is, the second lender is, who the 3 judgments are. And you're going to have to get in touch with all of them, okay, because they all have to agree. If the first says, sure, I'll take a hit, but the second and the third say they won't, then its property's going to get foreclosed, and there you go. They all are going to have to agree. Most of the time, they all will agree. As I mentioned before, there's that $60,000 average cost of having to foreclose anyway. So there's lots of incentive for the lenders to cooperate in these. As we go through how this works, I want you to keep in mind that there is no standard practice yet. Okay? I'm going to describe the general, I'd say almost the averages of what I'm seeing, because every lender has a different deal. There are some lenders who aren't set up for this at all because they haven't had a single short sale yet. And there's other lenders who've been doing this for a long time and they've got quite a system. And there's no consensus amongst the lenders as to how to do it yet. This time next year, I would expect this to be a very standardized process to do a short sale, to deal with the lenders. But right now, you know, so as you have done short sales, some of you raise your hands, when I say something that doesn't fall into what you saw, it's because either you had a different sort of lender or I'm just glossing over some of the small variations. And there could be all kinds of different things along the way. And it will continue to change. But what is pretty standard at the moment is you call the loss mitigation department. So let's say Wells Fargo is the lender and you've got a short sale. You walk over to the local branch of Wells Fargo and you say, you know, you guys hold this loan and we need to do a short sale. And they're going to go, oh, what? Okay, because they don't know. That's not their business. So you call that 1-800 number that nobody likes to call for whatever lender it is, and you ask for the loss mitigation department, and sure enough, you're going to get one because they almost all have them now. And they're not going to give you any information about the loan. They're not going to tell you anything. I'm not even sure they'll admit that that customer exists. But what they will do is they will send you a checklist and some documents. And the checklist is going to tell you everything that they need before they're going to approve the short sale. And one of the documents in there will be a letter of authorization signed by your customer that tells the bank that they can talk to you, and that way they will. Loss mitigation, it's probably the only time you're going to call the loss mitigation department because they will do nothing else over the phone. They do everything by facsimile. No phone calls after that, no emails after that. The loss mitigation department of a lender is basically the lowest rung on the totem pole. Okay? They're losing money for that bank. They're not making money for the bank. So it's, you know, folks between the ages of 18 and 25 who've just started the bank. If they show any initiative while they're there, they get promoted to somewhere else in the bank. So you got, you know, folks who are very nice and they're trying to help, but they're really not sophisticated. You know so much more about transactions than they do. They're not very well staffed either because it's not a production department that makes them any money. They just lose money on the loss mitigation department. So you get some young folks who are overworked, who have a couple of big stacks of files on their desk. One of the reasons why they don't take emails is there's so much turnover that if you email that person, they're probably not even in that department anymore. Seriously, they don't take phone calls because they want everything in writing. Facsimiles will get routed to the right person, so that's why they do it by facsimile. The checklist is incredibly important. Every lender right now has a different checklist. Every box is going to need to be checked. If you send in that list of stuff, okay, because it's going to be a package, and it doesn't include everything on the checklist, it goes into this pile over here of incomplete files, and they start dealing with the completed files, all right? And 5 or 6 weeks later, they're going to get back to you and say, your file's incomplete. Get me the rest of this information. and you're going to send it in, and then it's going to go to the bottom of the completed stack. The shortest short sale approval time I've seen is 2 weeks. The longest is never. The average is about 90 days. So if you get a 5-week delay because you didn't turn in everything on the checklist, then it's going to be longer than 90 days. Because it's just going to take longer. So, and they're not going to call you up right away and say, oh yeah, I just got this today and it's incomplete. Seriously, it goes into that other stack and they deal with it when they have time. So you want to make sure you get them everything that they ask for. And you're going to be talking to all the other lien holders as well. And you're going to get some who are going to say, no, I'm not going to take anything less. And I've had this happen. I've had a lender who'd say, fine, I'll do the short sale, everybody else takes a hit as well. Okay? And that's the idea, is everybody's going to take a hit. The first lender is not going to let anybody get all their due. Everybody who has an opportunity to get any money is going to take something less. So let's say you got a $1,000 judgment, all right? The first lender is going to say, that $1,000 judgment creditor only gets $800. They get any more than $800, I'm not going to approve this short sale. And I've had judgment creditors for $1,000 say, want my whole $1,000. And then I have to explain to them, then you're going to get foreclosed out because this lender's going to foreclose. And a couple times I've had them get foreclosed out and they got nothing. They could have taken $800. Their judgment would still be there, so they'd have $200 they could later get somewhere maybe, but at least they'd get $800 now, and they got nothing. So it gets even crazier than that when you're dealing with firsts and seconds. And I mentioned Washington Mutual because they are on my list of banks who aren't functioning well. It's a wonder that they sold for as little as they did. This is true. At a Washington Mutual first and a Washington Mutual second, okay? They're in default. They start the foreclosure process. The broker calls and starts the short sale process. The whole time the foreclosure is going on as well. Always the foreclosure is going on as well. They're two different departments. Okay? The department that does foreclosures is not the department that's doing the short sales. So they're both running at the same time. Okay? Whichever one happens first, that's the one that's going to happen. So we get Washington Mutual first loan division, says, oh yeah, fine, we'll do a short sale. Second loan has to take a hit as well. We call Washington Mutual for their second division, and they say, no, we won't agree to take that much of a loss on this loan. And we're like, okay, you realize you're the same company. And they're like, sorry, but we're different divisions, and we won't accept this amount. So we call back the first, and we say, they won't do it. It's your company. Maybe you'll just take a little more hit on yours. No, we won't. We're only going to take this much hit. Everybody else has to take this much hit. We call back the second. We say, hey, it's your company. They're saying, you got to take this much hit. And they're saying, no, we won't. It foreclosed. The first foreclosed out the second. Washington Mutual first loan foreclosed out the Washington Mutual second loan. They made less money. Same bank. Okay? That's the difficulty you're going to encounter going through this. And that's what happened. And I'm not surprised. There might be a reason why Washington Mutual was in trouble. But all the other lenders have the same sort of situation. And as you know, most loans are serviced by a servicing company. And the way servicing companies work, there's a standardization there. They almost all have the same servicing contract. And the contract says that they get paid a certain percentage for servicing the loan. Okay? And if the loan goes into default, then they have 90 days to either replace it with a conforming loan that's being paid on, or send it into foreclosure so that it can't just sit there and have non-payments for more than 90 days. Well, there aren't as many loans out there now to replace it with. So most of those are getting kicked into foreclosure on the 90th day, okay? Because that's how they get paid. And in fact, once it gets into foreclosure, the servicers get paid a little bit more. So they have even an incentive to kick it into foreclosure sooner than later. And so that foreclosure process is running. Those servicers are going to run it no matter what the short sale process is, because it's a different group, different contract, different amount of money that's getting paid. So the whole time you're fighting this foreclosure. And there are times, fortunately not the majority of the times, but there are times when the foreclosure happens before you can get the short sale. And I've had it. Literally, we're up to, we've got everything approved, but it isn't going to fund for a day, and the foreclosure happens. I've seen that 1 day difference. And it's foreclosed. That's it. Because the department that's doing the foreclosure is not going to postpone it. So, even though it's their own company.
Would you say that's universal, or?
I'm sorry?
Would you say that's universal, that the foreclosure will happen on
Yes.
the date?
Yes. That's I would say that's most of the time. They're just going to keep running that process. I have not seen very many postponed because there's a pending short sale. Different division, they're getting paid different ways, they're just going to run it through. And, you know, it's still a little speculative. Eventually, they're going to consolidate these groups, as they ought to, and it'll make more sense. But right now, that's just where we are. So, was that a sneeze? Gesundheit. So they're going to give you this list of things that they want. And it starts off with a hardship loss letter. Okay? That's a long term for, basically, it's a letter that says I'm broke. Okay? And it comes from the borrower and it says, I owe you this much money and the property's not worth that much and I need to sell it and I can't pay you anymore. There are brokers in Portland who do so many short sales that they have a form hardship loss letter on their computer system. They plug in their customers' names, the account number, and they print it off and they take it over for their customer to sign. Most borrowers in default stick their head in the sand. If you have a customer who's in default on their loan, tell them the first thing they need to do is call their bank. Okay? So many things would be helped if they just called their bank when they got that default notice and said, I got the notice, I'm really sorry, I'm broke right now. Okay? Because then they're on the system as cooperating. Even though they haven't paid anything, they're in the system as responding to this notice. Most of them don't. They bury their head in the sand, and the lender says, we have a party who's not paying, and they're not cooperating, so we're going to move forward with a foreclosure. And they can often get delayed if they would just call. So, and remember, it's a different department that's doing the loss mitigation department is going to be different than the folks who are doing the foreclosure. And so you may be working on this short sale the whole time, and the people doing the foreclosure don't know anything that's going on. So anyway, there's a hardship loss letter. You're the ones who are going to be doing it. Honestly, it's not the borrower. They stick their head in the sand and they just leave it all up to you. They're not getting anything out of the sale. They're not going to make $1 on the sale of this property. They just want it gone. So all the incentive to sell the property is on you. So you're the ones who wind up getting to do it. So I said it takes a lot more work, it takes a lot more time. So they send a hardship loss letter. Along with the hardship loss letter, they typically want the seller's financials. They want bank statements. They want proof of income. They want a list of assets. They want to know that this party actually can't pay them. All right? You know, if they've got $1 million stashed away somewhere, then they're not going to approve a short sale because that shows that they can actually still pay. It's not just this property isn't worth as much. They also lack the ability to pay. It's interesting. A lot of loans are sold, and so the loan app doesn't wind up finding its way to the new lender. But some loans are held. Okay? So the loan app is sitting there with the same lender that you're negotiating the short sale with. And this has been happening. And I don't know if it'll still happen as much because Washington Mutual was one of the ones who was doing it a great deal. And we'll see. Depends on how many people they lay off. That'll be the big speculation. So let's say you get a loan 6 months ago. You know, it's a stated income loan. You tell them how many assets you've got. You tell them what your financials are. 6 months later, you apply for a short sale, and you send them. You say, you know, before you said you made $150,000, and now your financials show that you're only making $80,000. All right, and you didn't take a hit in pay. You just lied to them at the loan app. This has been happening, right? Lots of people have been lying, stated income loans. You lie to them when you do the hardship loss letter. You send them all this stuff, and it shows that you lied. You know what they're doing? They're approving the short sale. The moment the short sale, because they want to get paid, right? The moment the short sale is approved, they turn them over to the feds, who prosecute them for mortgage fraud, which they should be prosecuted for mortgage fraud. It goes to that first question you asked me, whose fault is this? Well, I start out with the borrower who borrowed money when they shouldn't have. The people who are doing stated income loans who, you know, lied, okay? And so some lenders are catching them, and the feds are really into this because how do you prevent this from happening in the future? You don't let people get loans that shouldn't be getting the loans. And so you throw a few people in jail and folks are going to be less likely to lie. Because who knew before this would happen? Mortgage fraud has always been the case. As a real estate lawyer, I'll help people with all kinds of interesting transactions. And I mean, there's some things I won't take, but you know, in general, what you do is you figure out what needs to be done for this client and you help them. And obviously it needs to be ethical, it needs to fall within your own personal morals, but you know, you're a fairly neutral party working to close a transaction. But there are some transactions that really ought not to close. And those stated income loans where people lied, those are probably ones that ought not to happen and people should get in trouble. As I was going through my clients' transactions, if there was ever any hint of mortgage fraud, okay, I said, no, not doing it. I'll help you close lots of things, but I will never go to jail for you. Mortgage fraud, people go to jail for. And I have visited, as a visitor, a federal penitentiary. And they don't play tennis there. Okay? They just don't. You know, in the old days, you hear about these people who go to the federal pen for white-collar crimes and they play tennis for 90 days. It's just not happening. Okay? They're in cell blocks. Mortgage fraud is very bad, and there are people who are going to go to jail for it. Have been going to jail for it for years, but more people are going to be going to jail for it in the next few years, and they ought to, for some of the things they've been doing. So, the financials are going to get sent in. There's nothing you can do to, you know, make them conform to the loan app. Your client's probably never kept a copy. They're going to need an estimated HUD. That's where we come in as a title insurance company. This is how the lender sees how much of a hit they're going to take, and they see how much of a hit everybody else is going to take. Because as I mentioned before, they're going to make everybody take a hit, and that estimated HUD is going to show who's getting paid what. You know, first they're going to make sure that the seller's not getting a penny, all right? And then they're going to see what other judgment creditors are out there, who's getting paid what amount. They're going to need a comparative market analysis. That's where you come in. They're not at this point requiring appraisals, because that would cost money, and these people don't have money to pay for an appraisal. They're going to rely on you to do the comparative market analysis. Interestingly enough, they're relying on you as a biased party, okay, to be giving them the information they need. You know, there'd certainly be some incentive to show that it's worth what the offer is that's out there. And actually, to some extent, that ought to be true, because it's whatever the market will bear is what the value of a piece of property is.
Can we go to jail if we were wrong?
Well, I mentioned this for a reason. I don't accidentally go from mortgage fraud to talking about this. They're relying on you, and they're relying on you because, one, you're out there and your customers aren't having to pay for it, but the other is they know you've got some incentive not to lie to them, because otherwise it's mortgage fraud. And if you give them a comparative market analysis that you know is wrong, and they find out about it later, you bet you're going to get turned into the feds, and you can bet you're going to get prosecuted for mortgage fraud. And again, they don't play tennis in the federal penitentiary. So there's lots of reason for you to do it, as you ought to be doing it anyway. And that's how they're going to base what it ought to get paid, what somebody ought to pay for this property. They're usually not going to take less than that. You know, if you turn in an offer that's significantly less than your comparative market analysis, don't expect them to take the money. Yeah.
The example your buyer has, say for example, the buyer has enough money to pay what they want, but won't. Does the buyer go through some sort of a pre-qualification,
No.
or can they?
The buyer's financials are irrelevant to the transaction. The lender doesn't care at all. No, because the property is only going to sell for what it's worth anyway. They're also going to want an executed purchase and sale agreement. Okay? Not just a list of the terms or a draft of one. They want it signed by the buyer and the seller. And so they want to see that there's really a transaction to happen. I get asked often, you know, what do we do if there are multiple offers? Because some lenders are requiring that you leave the property on the market pending the sale that they've approved already. Even if they haven't said anything yet. There are often times, because these properties are distressed, folks know it, there'll be more offers coming in. I like it when there's more offers, although I think there'll be less of that as time goes along. The question becomes, because you're the agent, the question becomes who's the principal? As all practical matters, you're not dealing with the seller anymore, you're dealing with the lender on everything. They're approving the transaction. The seller really doesn't care. You know, once they've listed the property and signed that letter of authorization for you to talk to the bank, you're not going to talk to them anymore until they go to closing and sign, because they don't care. They're not interested. But they're your principal. So the lender is not your principal. You don't have the duties that your agent principal duties to the lender that you have with the seller. So you first start out by saying, well, what do I do with these multiple offers? Well, who's your customer? Who's your principal? Who do you ask about this? And they're going to say, we don't care, okay, because they're not getting any money out of this thing anyway. No matter what the price is, it's a short sale. They're not getting any money. So you don't have that obligation to the lender. But lenders are getting more sophisticated about these things. Some of them are now sending you a letter that says, you must keep the property on the market and you must send me any offers that come in. And I've had a couple brokers call and say, what do I do about this? And I'm like, I'd send in the offers, okay? Even though they're not your principal, I'd send them into them anyway. 2 reasons. One is I'm a firm believer that the more disclosure, the better off you'll be. The more you tell people, the less likely you're going to get blamed for something, the less likely you're going to get blamed, the less likely you'll be sued, the less likely you're sued, the less likely you'll be liable for something. Nobody wants to go to court. It's just not worth the time. So the more you disclose, the better. Just like when you see problems with the property, don't you disclose them? Does anybody here stick it in the file and hide it? I mean, it's just a bad idea. So I think the same thing applies to these multiple offers. The other is if the lender has instructed you to give them multiple offers if they come in, I think you should do it because there's the chance that if you don't and it could have sold for more money, you might be sued for, or you might be prosecuted for mortgage fraud. Okay, comes up again and again and again. Why would anybody do a short sale? Anybody wondering about this right now?
What is the motivation
Yeah.
for the seller to do the short sale?
What's the motivation?
If he doesn't want to go to jail because he's lied on letting things, why didn't he just walk away?
Well, because having your property foreclosed is going to affect your credit a lot worse than having it do a short sale. I think that's the biggest reason.
There are ways to get the money. Or is it your feeling that every short sale, I think you stated that the seller never gets money?
Right. The seller is never going to get money in a short sale. That's the very nature of a short sale. There's more money owed on it than it's worth, and the first lender is never going to let the seller walk away with a penny. I mean, that's while I'm talking about generalities as I go through these, that one is firm throughout all short sales. The seller's not getting a penny. Yeah.
Let's see, if they're selling short and they're collecting multiple offers, does a situation ever arise where there's like more competitive offers that arise up to the original amount of the mortgage to cover the entire thing?
Not seen it happen yet. I think it's only getting worse, not better, so I think you're less likely to see that happen. That is a possibility. Again, never seen it happen.
Theoretically, you're saying that the seller never gets anything out of this, but if I remember what I was reading about this, if it does approach that level and then
it's not a short sale. I mean, it's to be quite simple about it. Then it's just not a short sale.
Okay.
So then the parties are not taking a cut. So then it works out fine.
There will be bills that the seller owes on the property, usually to their lawyer, who they're involved with personally, and who knows them very well. And so if the lawyer is paid through the sale of the property also, then there's certainly possible that, the seller derives some benefit in that one.
Well, the seller's benefiting in the short sale from these obligations being paid, period. I mean, if you have a second loan, okay, and it gets foreclosed out, the loan is actually, the note is still there. So there's still going to be a personal obligation. Just like if you have a construction lien against the property and the first lender forecloses out that construction lien, there's still a construction contract for that debt that's still out there. So these obligations are still out there. So by negotiating a short sale and getting the parties to agree to take less, it's generally for the benefit of the seller to get those amounts reduced. Yeah, oh yeah.
Now, is there any law, or are they breaking any laws if the seller does actually get some money some way?
Well, they're not breaking any laws. I mean, it's an agreement. A short sale is an agreement amongst the parties. So they're not breaking any laws if they get some money, provided there weren't instructions to the contrary. I mean, if the first lender says the seller can get no money out of this, and the seller finagles a way to show a charge to an entity that's actually them, okay, that would be breaking a law. That would be mortgage fraud. Yeah. Yeah.
The Mortgage Reduction Tax Relief Act, how do they determine what exactly is a primary residence? If the seller's moved out of a primary residence in one location and has purchased something somewhere else, is that other one a primary residence still? I mean, it would be if they were selling it for capital gains purposes, but what's the...
Yeah, those are different. That is going to be different. And I start with I don't know. specifically because it's going to be under the federal tax law what they say is their primary residence, but I believe it's going to be where they're actually living and showing as their primary residence for their tax purposes. And if they've moved somewhere else, then I would think that is not going to be their primary residence anymore, although there may be some wiggle room for them having moved to an apartment pending the closing of the sale or something like that. So I wouldn't expect them to go after that. You know, one of the things when you look at the IRS and what they're agreeing to do and who they go after is they go after people who did something bad and made money because of what they did, okay? Fraud, all right, and receipt of funds. And if parties get done with something and they didn't mean to do something wrong and they're broke, the IRS usually doesn't chase those folks because there's really no reason for it. They're not going to get anything out of them, and it's actually going to prevent them from being able to do something better in the future. So someone who's moved to an apartment pending the sale of their transaction, you know, I don't ever see that as a situation where the IRS would ever even glance at them as to whether it was a primary residence. But if they sell 3 houses in a short sale this year and say they're all their primary residence, okay,
That wouldn't have worked, that wouldn't have worked for a capital gains deduction either. I'm just
It wouldn't.
wondering what the specific.
yeah, and I can't tell you, but when you get into that situation, we'll look it up. Call me and I'll actually look it up. Yeah.
You may be answering this question